What is up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja, and there's been a situation in the video game space that's been brewing for a while, and honestly I was kind of hoping it would kind of resolve itself and I wouldn't have to talk about it because it's a bit of a sensitive issue, but it doesn't seem like it's going away anytime soon. So obviously I'm going to talk about it in this particular video. So without further ado, let's rock. So the situation that I was teasing in the intro is the fact that Visa and Mastercard, among other payment processors, are, and I guess the best way for me to describe this is strong-arming Steam and itch.io to delist certain games with strong sexual content and what they describe as not safe for work content. And you may have actually heard about this situation already because, like I said earlier, it has been going on for a minute now, and it's one of those situations that I was kind of hoping would just resolve itself. But since that's not going to happen, we're going to dive into the details in this video, and of course I'm going to give you my 2 cents. But before we dive into the meat and potatoes of this situation, I do have 2 quick disclaimers that I want to get out of the way. One, I am not a journalist. This is not a hard news video. This is more of a news reaction video. I kind of aim for these videos to be like 60-40, 60% my opinion, 40% the actual like details. I want you to be able to know enough about this to know what I'm talking about, but this is mostly just kind of me giving you my opinion about what's going on. So, and this is one of the only times I'm going to ever use the expression, do your own research, but I will be linking the links to all the sources and the articles that I read that I'm going to kind of be referencing in this video, in the video description below. And I would suggest, and I kind of would suggest this for any video like this, whether it's my video or whoever's that you're watching on the internet, do not trust people, just random people on the internet. Definitely try to kind of seek out the actual sources yourself to kind of, again, do your own research. And the next disclaimer is kind of the big elephant in the room. So there is a particular game that I won't name here, and there's also other games like it that are kind of the center of this controversy that apparently, I've never actually played them myself and I would never play them, but apparently they promote sexual assault and incest. I personally think those games are vile and are trash. However, all that being said, assuming that they're not breaking any laws and assuming that there's some reasonable measures put in place to make sure that children shouldn't play them, I think that we're all adults here. And just because I'm not going to purchase and play those types of games doesn't mean that I think that they shouldn't exist altogether. I think they're trash, but I think all adults should be able to make their own decisions about what they can and cannot play. And we'll get into who is actually trying to make those decisions for them. And that's kind of the crux of this issue, is it's not the adults that are the individual adults, I should say, that are making the decision. It's other entities that are trying to make the decision for them. And there's actually a particular group that we'll talk about here in a little bit that's kind of spearheading this effort, that I have a theory, and I could be wrong. I hope that I'm wrong, that it seems to me are operating in bad faith and are actually kind of using these particular games that, again, I find disgusting. They're kind of using these games as a excuse to delist a lot of other games that have like strong sexual content, basically just games that they don't agree with. So a lot of games are getting swept up in this controversy that have nothing to do with these other games. And so I find it very suspicious, and I feel like they're operating in bad faith, trying to get other games delisted as well. But we'll get to that here in a second. All right, so now that we got that out of the way, let's dive into the details. So Polygon posted this particular article on July 16th. So like I said earlier, this has been going on for a minute now. And essentially what this article is about, I'm not going to read it word for word to you. Again, this will be linked in the video description. You can read it for yourself. But essentially, they found out that Steam's onboarding process for game developers has been adjusted recently, and it's a very confusing thing that was added to this onboarding process. Essentially, content that violates the rules and standards set forth by Steam's payment processors and related card networks and banks or internet network providers are not allowed now, which is super vague. So there's no mention of what that content could be, and I honestly, and we'll dive into this a little bit more later, I think that's kind of the point based on the group that we'll talk about later that's kind of behind this whole mess. I think that's kind of the point, because I think they want to get rid of a bunch of different games, and if they can make these new rules as vague as possible, then they can kind of use that as a springboard to get rid of other games in the future. And to make matters worse, Steam isn't the only platform delisting these not safe for work games. itch.io is also following suit, and I actually would argue that it's worse that itch is doing it. Now, I'll get to this here in a little bit, but I actually don't blame Steam or itch for any of this. This is Visa, Mastercard, it's the payment processors, and then eventually we'll get to the puppet master group that's kind of kickstarted all of this later. I think it's their fault. It's not necessarily Steam and itch's fault. I just want to make that clear right off the bat. But basically, if you're not aware, itch.io is essentially Steam, but they focus on indie developers. So I actually think it's worse that itch is removing these games, because that's kind of the whole point that this site exists, is they don't want these indie developers have to rely on just Steam. They wanted to give them a platform that they would have a place to post their games and sell their games. And so I definitely appreciate that itch exists. So I actually think it's worse that it's happening on this site as well. Essentially, as of Thursday, and this article is a little old as well, like I said, this has been going on for a little bit. This was posted on July 24th. So it says in the article, as of Thursday, the indie focused platform has de-indexed adult content, which essentially means that you can't see it or you can't search for the content on their site anymore, which I guess is a technicality. They haven't really deleted the games, but if you can't search for them and you can't see them on the site, are they really on the site? So I do think that it's a little bit of a technicality. They haven't really removed the games, but if you can't see them or search for them, do they really even exist? And the creator of itch.io mentioned that the situation developed rapidly and we had to act urgently to protect the platform's core payment infrastructure. Unfortunately, this meant it was unrealistic to provide creators with advance notice before making this change. We know that this is not ideal and we apologize for the abruptness of this change. Now, again, this article, as all the articles, will be linked in the video description. This article makes note, and I do again want to make this clear, I don't necessarily think that this is Steam or itch's fault, because as this article points out, loss of payment methods would prevent customers from being able to purchase other titles and game content on Steam. So essentially, payment processors went to Steam and itch and were like, if you don't make these changes, we're not going to allow people to make payments on your site. And so no matter what the game was, so basically if they pulled back their services, itch and Steam literally couldn't make any money. Nobody could pay for a game on their site. So again, I don't blame either one of these platforms for doing this. I blame the corporate overlords and the lobbyists that made this happen. And gamers are not taking this news lying down. There's a couple of things that a few different groups are doing. One, there is a change.org petition that, as of recording this, has over 230,000 signatures, including yours truly. It takes like 15 seconds to do. So I would suggest, if you care deeply about this issue, to at least sign that petition. I know these petitions don't always go anywhere, but the more signatures that we get, the better chance that we'll actually get their attention. Like I said, it takes like 15 seconds to do. I feel like if this is something that you're passionate about, this is the bare minimum that you should be doing. I will put the link down in the video description so you can sign the petition if you want to. However, there are also some gamers that are a lot braver than me that are willing to actually talk to a stranger on the telephone, which I avoid like the absolute plague. There is so much more work that I would do to get around having to talk to somebody on the phone. So I'm not going to call anybody, but some gamers have been calling Visa and Mastercard, just like their general customer service line, just to clog up that line and just kind of create a fuss just to get the attention of the higher ups in Visa and Mastercard. And while I do agree in theory with the idea of wanting to get your voices heard, and this is kind of one way, we don't have very many methods to get big companies like Visa and Mastercard to listen to us. So if this is your way of kind of throwing your weight around, I definitely appreciate that. You only have so many levers to pull, so I definitely appreciate the people willing to pull this lever. I just want to remind everybody that the people answering these phone calls are probably gamers themselves, at least most of them are, and they don't have the ability or the power to change it, and they didn't make the decision to begin with. And so they're just regular people getting paid like shit to get yelled at for 8 hours a day. So I would just ask everybody that are making these phone calls just to remember that, and just to remember to be nicer to these people. Again, the idea behind these calls is just to kind of get the attention of the higher ups. It's not to get angry and get mean at these people answering the phone calls, because they're not the ones that can change anything. And whether it's the news coverage of this issue, petition, or the phone calls, we definitely have their attention. So much so that MasterCard released the following statement. MasterCard has not evaluated any game or required restrictions of any activity on game creator sites and platforms, contrary to media reports and allegations. Our payment network follows standards based on the rule of law. Put simply, we allow all lawful purchases on our network. At the same time, we require merchants to have appropriate controls to ensure MasterCard cards cannot be used for unlawful purchases, including illegal adult content. And at face value, that kind of sounds just like your typical corporate PR bullshit. Turns out, upon a further investigation, it's not entirely bullshit. It does appear that MasterCard are trying to get out of this situation on a technicality. MasterCard technically doesn't process the payments. It only facilitates companies like PayPal and Stripe to do so. And technically, it's the payment processors that are forcing Steam and itch to delist these games. Valve has reached out to the payment processors that cited MasterCard's rule 5.12.7 that, and I'm paraphrasing here, prohibits any transaction that may damage the goodwill of MasterCard, which, side note, I personally reject the notion that a credit card company has any goodwill. There's plenty of literature to suggest that credit card companies have moral gray policies, and that's my nice way of putting it, that are a net negative to society, but that's a topic for a different video on probably a different channel. Back to the actual issue at hand, MasterCard actually refused to speak with Valve directly, and I believe they did that to kind of have cover to blame the payment processors. If they never actually spoke to Valve directly, then they can kind of push it on to somebody else. And it's kind of a snake eating itself sort of situation. MasterCard can point to the payment processors, and since the payment processors are kind of just doing MasterCard's will, the payment processors then can point to MasterCard and be like, well, they cited their rule, and this is why we can't process these payments anymore. And it's just gonna go around and around and around. So they're almost kind of providing cover for each other in a way. And as shady as Visa and MasterCard seem to be in this situation, apparently they're not even the final boss of this issue. That title goes to an anti-porn lobbying group in Australia called Collective Shout. They basically kickstarted this entire situation on July 11th. Like I said, it's been going on for a minute. On July 11th, they posted an open letter to these payment processors, kind of pressuring them to delist games that they deemed profited from sexual assault, child abuse, and incest. And if you've never heard of Collective Shout, Don't worry, either had I. I did kind of know of them, like I kind of had heard of a few things that they had protested, but I didn't know them by name. However, they have been around for a minute. This group was founded in '09, and honestly, I vaguely remember this being a story in 2014, but I did not know it was this particular group. Apparently, this is the group behind the Grand Theft Auto 5 ban in Australia. Apparently, they protested that game, and they were able to get it pulled from the shelves of Targets and Kmart. You can always tell how old the story is if Kmart's involved. But in Australia, because this is an Australian group, they were actually able to get Grand Theft Auto 5 pulled from the shelves of Target and Kmart, and they actually tried to do a similar thing in 2018 when Detroit Become Human was released, because they said that it contained themes of child abuse and violence against women, which it does, but it's kind of odd to protest that game because it's been a minute since I played that game, but it always kind of felt like, if I remember correctly, and definitely correct me if I'm wrong, but it felt like the abusers were the bad guys in that game. Like you were supposed to, those situations happened and it was supposed to actually create empathy for the abusee, or I guess the victim of the abuse. And you were supposed to think that the abusers were the bad guys. And so if anybody from Collective Shout actually played the game, which I find unlikely because they protested it, maybe they would actually be on the side of this game because it was kind of trying to create the same thing that they were doing. Well, at least what they thought they were doing by protesting the game. So it's just another example of kind of these groups not really knowing what they're talking about. And to be honest, this whole thing just kind of feels like a retread of the violent video games make you violent discussion. It's not the exact same argument, but it kind of feels like that same mindset. I think I've talked about this on past episodes, but I've been a gamer my entire life, and one of my favorite franchises of all time, it's actually one of the first video games I ever played, was Mortal Kombat on Super Nintendo. I love fighting games. I've played Mortal Kombat, the entire franchise, my entire life. And that was kind of the game that kickstarted this entire like anti-violent video game crusade. And it just isn't true. Like, violent video games just don't make you violent. I'm literally the proof of that. I've played these games my entire life, and I'm the guy that refuses to like step on a bug in his house. Like, I'm gonna scoop it up with a napkin and I'm gonna let it outside. Like, that's the type of guy that I am, and I've played these games my entire life. So violent video games do not make you violent. And if you play Grand Theft Auto 5, it's not gonna make you wanna pick up a sex worker and abuse them. Like, that, there's not a connection between those things. Detroit Become Human doesn't make you violent or want to abuse children or women or anything like that. There's not a connection between those two things. Again, I personally think that these games that promote sexual assault and incest are vile and trash, and I personally would never ever play them. But that is a moral judgment that I am making. I am not the arbiter of what games should and should not be played. Just because I wouldn't play a game doesn't mean that I don't think that you should play a game, or I don't think that that game shouldn't exist. Again, as long as there are reasonable measures put in place to make sure that kids aren't playing these games, I think they should still exist, even though I find them truly vile. And at the end of the day, I just don't think that these anti-porn lobbyists, and especially credit card companies, should be the arbiters of what games we can and cannot play. Yes, I don't agree with these particular games, but I do think that it's kind of a slippery slope. If we bend the knee on these games, is it just going to give them more confidence to go after the next wave of games that they find inappropriate? Like, I am assuming that their victory with Grand Theft Auto 5 in, what was that, 2014, that probably gave them confidence to go after Detroit Become Human in 2018. And so I think it's a slippery slope. If we bend the knee on this one, it's just going to give them more and more confidence. And before I wrap up this video, I do want to remind everybody that I actually don't necessarily blame Steam or itch for this situation. It actually sounds like, based on the articles that I read, that they try to fight this as much as possible, but it got to the point where these payment processors were like, well, we're gonna take away the ability to process any payment for any game. And at that point, they kind of had to bend the knee. Their hands were tied at that point. So I don't necessarily blame them. And it sounds like itch.io is working pretty hard to get a lot of these games relisted, especially if they are free to play, because obviously you don't need a payment processor for a free to play game. So they're trying to get those games relisted, and they're working, it sounds like, a case by case basis to get these other not for safe for work games relisted as well. And that's honestly the cherry on top of this really shitty Sunday, is there's a lot of other games that are getting grouped up with these like sexual assault, incest games. And it kind of feels like they're using those games as a boogeyman and just an excuse to kind of group all these games together, these not safe for work, whatever that means, those types of games that have mature themes, but handle them with nuance, that aren't just trying to be explicit for explicit's sake, that actually handle these themes with nuance. They're kind of getting grouped up in the same bucket as these other games, and it kind of makes me suspicious that that wasn't the plan all along. And unfortunately, a lot of these games are also LGBTQ plus games. They also have those themes, and again, that just makes me even more suspicious that that was kind of the plan all along. I hope that I'm wrong, but I've just kind of seen this playbook before, and it just feels like that was the plan all along. But as always, those are just my opinions. I'd love to hear yours in the comments down below. Of course, if you enjoyed this video, which I hope that you did, if you've made it this far in the video, definitely smash that like button, as the kids say. If you especially enjoyed it, definitely consider subscribing and dinging that bell if you do subscribe. That way you get notified every time I post another video. I try to post weekly gaming related content, so you obviously like that type of content. If you watch this video as far as you did, definitely consider subscribing and dinging that bell. But until next video, take it easy. What's up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja, and this is my boy Yoshi, aka Kitty Boy, and we were just talking, and we agree that since you made it this far in the video, you might as well subscribe. You wouldn't want to disappoint Kitty Boy, would you?